Pressure back on. Oh, it's off the post. And Cavalier are champions in the land of wood and water.
So lightning has struck twice for Cavalier as for the second consecutive season. They captured the Wren Nephew Jamaica Premier League by a penalty shootout against Mount Pleasant. The win came following a tense 0-0 draw during regulation and extra time at the National Stadium on Friday night. And although Cavalier were the first to miss a penalty through Christopher Ainsworth, misses from Mount Pleasant's captain Sule McCullough and Clifford Thomas sealed the victory. The head coach of the runners-up, Theodore Tapper Whitmore, quite understandably disappointed following the loss.
You can't find words to explain. I think the only thing we did tonight wrong was not winning the game. I think in the final third, we want more. We need to get the ball in the back of the net. We didn't do that tonight. Such is the nature of the game.
And on the other end of things, Cavalier's technical director, Rudolph Speed, was full of praise for his unit.
This one, we had to fight with everything we got. And as you can see, we have a lot of young, inexperienced players. But we just use the resources the best way we can. Mount Pleasant is known for getting to a rhythm. They play, inverted wing back, and they get into this rhythm all the time. So all I did was just disrupt it as best as I can. I thought though that I won the game long time though with a penalty there, but it was hard to come back and win it again in a penalty shootout. But that's how it goes sometimes. This is a team that really don't know how to lose, no matter what the stakes are and no matter what they put in front of us. And I can just say thanks to the guys. They work hard. We lost 8 players from last year's team. Some of these players will probably not represent us again, so it's a good sending off for those.
Yeah, so the St. Lucian national goalkeeper Vino Bartlett coming up big for Cavalier on the night. And apart from his penalties performance in the shootout, had a good game in open play as well. And Cavalier coming up with another victory in the Premier League. And really good on them. Rudolph Speed doing a magnificent job. And Leger Williams now joins us to discuss what happened. We'll talk about that third place playoff in just a moment, because that was secondary really, as it usually is. But can you comment, Liz, on a general feeling that Cavalier and Speed don't get the credit they deserve for what they have achieved in domestic football, let's say in the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I was on commentary for the game, and I was saying it repeatedly. I think over this 2-year stretch, I don't think we've seen, especially in modern history, a Jamaica Premier League team be this successful, not only in the island of Jamaica, but also, I would say, in the Caribbean as well. So I think the combination of those two factors has made them, as I said on commentary, and I'm saying it again, one of the most, if not the most successful team in the Premier League's history. But with that being said, I would like to first say, congrats to Cavalier. Winning is a skill. And it seems as if Cavalier and their players and their coaching staff, especially their technical director, Rudolph Speed, and head coach, he doubles up. So winning is a skill, and it seems that they've mastered that skill. But one thing I will say is that I was very disappointed with how they approached the game, how they played the game. And, it's a little bit disheartening, in my opinion, because, many people out there, they just like to focus on, who wins a football game, who wins the titles. But as an analyst, that's not really what I focus on. And that it just wasn't football to me. And I was very disappointed with how they approached it. But kudos to them for winning.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think our viewers would need some expansion on that point.
They just didn't come to play any sort of attacking football. And it's not as if Cavalier are incapable of defending first and then being dangerous. And yes, Mount Pleasant were good defensively on the night as well, but we've seen Cavalier against even better opponents than Mount Pleasant when they played Inter Miami, batten down the hatches, yes, but still had a threat, when they were attacking. We've seen them in these playoffs produce very good attacking performances, especially against Arnett Gardens in that semi-final first leg. And Cavalier, I think, coming into the game, Rudolph Speed was mentioning the fact that, they were severely outmatched. I was never of that assumption. I do think that Mount Pleasant are the better team on paper, but I think if you were to combine all of the players on the pitch and give a top 5 of those players, I would say that Cavalier probably have 3 of those 5 players in Richard King, who was great defensively, but then Dwayne Atkinson and John Mara Calvin, who were shunted into positions that they don't usually play in order to create a more effective defensive unit. And again, there's no issue with that per se, but I still think that the intent that Cavalier showed 2 shots, 2 shots for the entirety of 120 minutes, none on target. It was obvious that they were playing for penalties. It just rubbed me the wrong way completely. And, you know, they got the win, so looking back in history, people won't notice that per se, but I think all in all, it just wasn't a good advertisement for the league.
Yeah, but if you flip the coin, I guess you could credit Speed's application for the result, because if they played the way you preferred them to play, maybe they wouldn't have won.
No, it's not necessarily a preference, you know. It's not necessarily a preference, because that's why I prefaced it by saying that congrats to them for winning, because winning is a skill. But I'm saying that defensively, fantastic, yes. But at times in the game, Mount Pleasant came with their defensive game plan as well. Cavalier don't like to play through the middle of the pitch. They don't like to use their midfielders a lot in build-up. So Mount Pleasant, they would have their first line of engagement really high, in that I would say a semi-high press, but then the rest of their team would be very deep. That's not something that you see very often from a high-pressing team, because they know Cavalier only want to play balls long. And for a team that has 5 days to prepare for a final, there was no plan B. They just still said, okay, we're just going to play all of these passes long, try and win the second or the third ball, and then maybe one of our magic players can produce something. You have Dwayne Atkinson, who has been the best player in the playoffs, and you play him out of position on the right, well, technically out of position on the right wing, not the position we're used to seeing him play, and had him put in a defensive shift that resulted in him having to come off the pitch needing oxygen. So I think it was just extremely negative on their part. And as I said, most people, and I'm sure Ricardo is one of those people as well, football is all about winning. I'm an analyst. I'm saying this is Ligier Williams' opinion. I'm an analyst, and that's not what football is about for me. So I was just extremely disappointed, and many people were as well, how the game played out.
Yeah, and I completely understand your point of view, Ligier, in terms of what you want to see from a football game. But in my estimation, there is a difference between a regular football game and a football game where you are challenging for a title that will define everything else that you have done for the duration of that season. And I say all of that because I'm suggesting to you that the essence of winning is being able, and certainly winning a title now, not just winning individual matches throughout the course of a season, but is being able to devise a plan that as a coaching unit, as a technical unit, you think will give you the best chance of winning. And in my estimation, isn't that what Cavalier did? And yes, it might not look attractive, it might not look like the most beautiful football, but Cavalier have already proven that they can play beautiful football. They've already proven that they can score goals. They've already proven that they can defend. The only thing they needed to prove on Friday night was that they could beat Mount Pleasant again and win the championship title.
I'm going to come back at you with 2 different points.
Sure.
So first of all, you're saying that they devised a plan in order to win the game, right? They devised their plan to win the game. A penalty shootout is a lottery. So if their plan was to go all the way to a penalty shootout and then win the game that way, and it looked that way from around 60 minutes.
But the plan isn't necessarily to go to a penalty shootout, though. You understand that part of the plan may take you to a penalty shootout, but the plan is to ensure that Mount Pleasant does not score. You heard Rodolphe Speed saying he thought he should have had the opportunity to win the game earlier by getting a penalty himself.
I'm not quite sure why he said that, but carry on.
I'm just saying, that's his opinion. But the point I'm trying to make, it's not that you go in and say, I am going to take this game to penalty. It's probably, we're going to put in such a defensive shift that the main aim is to prevent Mount Pleasant from scoring. And if that takes us to penalties, then we'll take our chances there.
I know it's interesting. You see, I have no issues with defensive football. I have no issues with anything that you just said. They didn't defend that great to a level, because in my estimation, watching the game, dissecting the game, rewatching the game, they didn't defend to a level where they just nullified all of the threat that Mount Pleasant wanted to have.
Okay.
Mount Pleasant still dominated the ball. They still dominated certain zones. The strikers just weren't clinical. The players that were there were not clinical, and Vina Bartlett had a great game. So if it was a case where Cavalier said, okay, we're just going to come into this game and we're not going to concede, because if we don't concede, we're not losing, and that was the plan. And they stopped Mount Pleasant from building up. They stopped Mount Pleasant from getting shots off. They stopped Mount Pleasant from looking dangerous, and the game was a dull 0-0. I would have a much different estimation. But because Cavalier, in my opinion, for that game specifically, I've seen them defend much better.
Yeah, so my thing is then, so the issue then shouldn't be Cavalier and how they played. The issue, based on what you just said, should be Mount Pleasant's inability to convert opportunities in front of goal. And from what I saw, they had, probably about 4 or 5 pretty good ones throughout the course of the 120 minutes.
That's why I said I was going to come back with 2 points, but I'll add a third now. So I will say that I think Mount Pleasant at times played into the hands of Cavalier. Because Mount Pleasant are a team that emphasize control in all areas of the pitch. At no point did they see that Cavalier was playing this type of football and said, we're going to go gung-ho and we're going to go for a more expansive style of football. They wanted to control things. They didn't want Cavalier to get on the transition, any of that. So I do think that a lot of the blame that's going to be put around the game being bad, some of it has to go to Mount Pleasant as well.
But would you admit that's a difficult decision for Mount Pleasant to make in a championship match, knowing fully well that Cavalier has the potential to catch them on the counter, even if in the moment it doesn't seem that's the style they wanted to play on the night?
It is a difficult decision, but football, you're meant to make difficult decisions. And the reason why I said all of this to say, because I was coming around to a rounded point. Now, this is bigger than the Jamaica Premier League final, bigger than Mount Pleasant, bigger than Cavalier. Jamaica is a developing country, especially in football, we're a development country. Everyone knows that Rudolph Speed even said it after the game as well. Most of these players, some of his players won't be here. And that's because a lot of European countries look to Jamaica because of their physical attributes, because of some of their technical abilities, especially defenders as well. They look to them and they want to get in some of those players into their setups abroad. Now, the Jamaica Premier League final is the most watched football game out of Jamaica, I would say, maybe barring a schoolboy football final, a Manning Cup final or so. But I'm sure the Jamaica Premier League final is up there. The stadium was around 3/4 full. There was a lot of intrigue into the game. What did the approach from Cavalier specifically, Mount Pleasant as well, but what did that approach put forward in terms of platforming those good players that you have? What did that approach do for making a club see? Because that game could have been the introduction for many clubs to see a Dwayne Atkinson, to see a Jalmara Calvin.
But at the same time, though, Leger, in fairness, these guys are playing week in, week out. Cavalier won the CONCACAF Caribbean Cup. They played in the CONCACAF Champions League. So if you're talking about serious scouts, they're not going to be using this one game. They're going to be using a series of games over a number of months. So I don't know if this one Ricardo. Game, yes.
Let me educate you on how scouts work.
Please do.
Scouts don't come to a game and just watch a full 90. Usually within like 10 minutes, a scout can see everything that he needs to know.
No. I'm not saying no to that. The point I'm making to you, though, is that this match, which is not even the biggest match that Cavalier has played, I am not convinced that is the match that would necessarily have the most scouts looking at players from Cavalier. That's what I'm suggesting to you.
I'm not disagreeing with that point, and I'm not disagreeing with that point, but I'm saying it is one of the games that Cavalier would have played over the past couple of years that could be more likely to be an introduction point for one of those players?
I doubt that though, Lejay, given the magnitude of the games they have played in the last 8 months, that this Jamaica Premier League final would be the introduction for a number of these Cavalier players when they've played in the Caribbean Cup, the CONCACAF Champions League, when they've played against Inter Miami, home and away. I find that difficult to
possibility.
understand, to believe, sorry.
Yeah, we're out of time, though, but just a quick comment on Arnett Garns and their third-place playoff victory, which gets them to the Caribbean Shield and a possible pathway to the CONCACAF Club Championship. Given the fact that they didn't make the final and they would have been disappointed with their season, how much of a redemption is that for them?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Their head coach, David Gilbert, said after the game, maybe, well, I'm assuming it was a joke. He said, maybe I'll keep my job now. And our good friend George Davis also mentioned...
I don't think it was a joke.
Our good friend George Davis also said that if there's one thing that we know for sure in the Jamaica Premier League, based on the last 2 seasons, is who the best 3 teams in the league are.
By the way, quick question. Will Theodore Whitmore keep his job at Mount Pleasant?
Mount Pleasant would be really stupid to let him go. That's one thing I know for sure. But
well, it would have been the first.
Yeah, that's the issue. But he should keep his job.
All right, we're out of time. We go to break. I'll be back in a moment with our second zone update before we get into the last phase of our show.